So today I'm deeply honored to introduce Devika Bulchandani, Global CEO of Ogilvy. Devika oversees the creative network's five core capabilities: advertising, PR, experience, health, and consulting. Devika has been the driving force behind many powerful campaigns, including the iconic Fearless Girl campaign, a symbol of women's equality that became one of the most awarded campaigns in Cannes Lions history. She has received numerous accolades, including NY Power Woman, a US advertising agency head of the year, and Working Mother of the Year. And I can go on, but I'm going to stop here because there's so much to learn from Devika. Hi, Devika. Welcome to Atlanta Diaries.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that very, very generous introduction.
I just finished watching your Matrix Award speech, and I just love that starting line, from a good girl to a consequential girl. Tell us about this mantra and what inspired it.
I think for anybody, and you can certainly identify with this, when you come to the US and people think you've grown up in India, they always go, oh my God, you came here for a better life. And in India, I didn't have a bad life. I come from a well-to-do family, and there's a burden of privilege in India. And it's a very hard thing for people to understand unless you've lived it. And that burden of privilege is you are going to follow a certain way of doing things because our families have done it a certain way, and you follow that same path. And, if I had to give it a headline, that is, be a good girl. What does a good girl do? A good girl has an arranged marriage. I bucked that trend. A good girl has, children. Well, I love my two children, and I'm really happy I did not buck that trend. A good girl in the families we come from doesn't actually work. A good girl supports the family. A good girl stays at home and makes sure the in-laws and, the parents and everybody is well taken care of. That's what a good girl was. And when I was 13, I had this image in my head. And I said to my mom, I want to go to bed tired. And they all used to laugh at me. Because again, the life in India is you never did anything. You didn't pick up a glass of water. Everything is done for you, right? It's quite glamorous on the one side. I don't know what the hell I was thinking because I'm tired every day. But I think my 13-year-old mind just wanted to be consequential. So as a consequence, I say I don't wear skirts. I don't wear dresses. And I think that's all a consequence of really fighting against this thing of being a girl. I was a tomboy all my life. In my personality, I still think of myself sort of as a tomboy. I've become much more feminine now, I'd say, but I was not as a kid. And my parents were part of a large joint family of sorts. And it was a family business. My dad would come home. Nobody talked about it, but I would always see like my mom getting this envelope, which I guess was the monthly money, to run the house. And the one thing I was really clear about is I want to earn money, my own money. And that was a very important aspect of declaring my independence, being consequential. Because if you want any freedom, the most important freedom you need to have is economic freedom.
I can relate to you in so many ways, Devika. I'm myself coming from a joint family. I myself am coming from a business family. But where did that desperation, if I can use that word, for financial independence come from? Like what sort of triggered that thought and that urgency in your head?
I don't know how to describe it, but, you see so many codes. One thing we become really good at in joint families is reading a room. You can read the code since you're 5.
So true.
You know how to deal with this uncle and that aunt. Just go touch their feet, then they'll go away. Or, you know the codes. And I just felt like from the beginning to say, if I had that bit of independence, that my own sense of affirmation, and by the way, you cannot earn a living without being consequential. You have to do something. Did you see Michelle Obama's speech yesterday? Oh my God. We have to have a moment to talk about that later.
Definitely.
But I knew that I had to do something to be able to have that financial freedom. My father-in-law, who I loved dearly, who's passed away a while ago, one day said to me, he said, I don't understand why you have these jobs. If you want money, I'll give you money. And I looked at him and I said, no, Dad, you can't afford me.
I love it. Yeah. And I'm guessing subconsciously you notice some undercurrents.
You notice the undercurrents, you understand why does my father get to go to work? Why do my brothers get to have the things? My brothers were allowed to do something. It was, you knew that they would have certain liberties that I didn't. And I just would always go, oh, so they go to the office. In our case, it was the factory. When they go to the factory, dad gets the money and hands it to mom. I never see mom handing it to dad. And that one thing of who hands it to who creates all the power structures, by the way, not just in business, but in families, in relationships, in marriages.
Yeah.
And I can't talk about equity and equality in the world till I don't have it in my marriage.
Absolutely. And this takes me to this comment or this learning where I wanted to understand from women what kind of challenges are they going through. And one question which stayed with me the most was, men have to state and women have to convince. What is your thought on that? Given that now you've traversed this journey from being a good girl to a consequential girl.
Men don't even have to state. They just have to be. You show up in a room and centuries of sort of preordained sort of codes just happen. And what we carry with us is also centuries of preordained codes. And we've got to speak and we've got to convince because we're breaking things. They're not. Right? I'm trying to create something new. I'm trying to say, I know this has never happened before, but if it does happen, maybe it's a better way of doing things. And I know we talk about sort of men and women, and I think it is never a versus, because for any woman to succeed, a man has to change. Right? So in my personal life, it was my fight. But if Ash, my husband, didn't become an equal partner in all the codes that were meant to be mine, because I'm encroaching into what are meant to be the male codes, right? So there's no way to do it if he didn't break his own sort of internal barriers and accept the codes that are meant to be the feminine codes. So our kids always joke to say, like, I don't know who's the mom, who's the dad. Dad took me to soccer practice. He's taken my daughter to buy tampons, and he's done things with her that a mother would do, and I've done things with them that a father would do. But that has to happen. And of course, the business context, and I can talk about that for hours as well. But if it doesn't happen at home, it'll never happen in the business context.
Did you ever feel compelled to also change mindsets back home?
Nobody can understand. Like, there are times I try to describe my childhood and I'm like, it's impossible. Nobody can understand it.
Yeah.
Yes. So the answer to that is I will take every opportunity to do that. The first person that I, wanted to change it for was my younger sister. She's 6 years younger than me. And I always joke to say I had to fight every fight with mom and dad. And she's like, yeah, that's the benefit of being a younger sister.
Right.
And she is one of, the most important cinematographers in India, an underwater cinematographer, one of only 7 in the world.
Hoping to bring her next after you.
No, absolutely. We've been dying to do one together, actually, because that would be so fun.
Yeah.
So yes, I think one of the people who changed the most watching me and my sister was my father.
Tell us about that, Devika.
I think the way my relationship with my father changed is I felt like over the years I went from being his daughter. So what do you talk to your daughters about? You love them, but you talk business with your boys, but you never do that with your daughters. And then what I saw as my career started sort of developing is him talking to me about issues that he would not have. And initiating those conversations, right? And whenever he came to the US, we'd go have a boozy lunch, and then we would really discuss and debate issues where I'd take him on, which never would have happened, by the way.
Yeah.
For a girl to take on a father on issues of gender, issues of race, issues of, misogyny. And by the way, he didn't agree with me on everything. But the fact that we could talk about it and have a glass of wine or 2 or 3 while we were talking about it, like one of my most favorite memories is having this conversation at Italy on 23rd Street. And I'm so mad at him because I think his opinions are totally outdated and old-fashioned. And he just said, you have to understand where I come from. I respect your opinion. I can't understand it. I'm really passionate about, by the way, taking all of the stuff I talk about and using the work that we do to break it. So stop the beauty test in India for Dove.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's not just in the conversations, but it's what do we do with our clients and how can we break those stereotypes, whether it's back in India or it's Fearless Girl here. So that's one thing I'm super passionate about, taking these issues and using the work we do to break it.
Yeah, and I love the way you spoke about how ad agencies really amplify the impact, right?
Look, media has created every stereotype.
Yeah.
Women were always cast as housewives.
Mm.
Right? I want a woman to be the bad superhero.
Mm.
There's also reverse stereotypes. The men are always the bad people, right? So media creates everything. We have the most important tool, which is we have a job. People always say, like, don't you want to go into politics and change something? I'm like, I've got the most incredible platform, which is 1 million amazing clients in the world and the power of creativity to be able to make more of an impact here than to march on the streets. And fortunately, in sort of my lifetime, whether it's actual policies, we've changed a law in the Honduras, the Crown Act, which is in 26 states in the US with Dove. We're doing work with the Equal Rights Amendment, with Kids Online Safety Act, another thing that we're working on with Dove. We've changed corporate policies. I think that I don't have to do it as a volunteer in the evening, that I have the ability to do it here, is the luckiest thing that can have ever happened.
So I want to backtrack this conversation a bit, right? You mentioned, in many of your interviews that advertising was happenstance. And of course, once you got into it, there was no looking back. What then still led you to communication in your master's program?
So I did my bachelor's in India. I was in Bombay at St. Xavier's College.
Yeah.
I knew one thing, that I had to leave India and I had to leave my familial structure to be able to get the freedom that I crave.
Mm.
Now that's sort of my inner drive. The truth is I just followed Ashwin. I'm kidding. But if I don't say that, he'd kill me. No, there's a lot of truth to it. I always knew I wanted to come to the US and he was here. So it was perfect. I got to pursue my own dreams and at the same time to pursue the man that I wanted to marry. By the way, I'm not this big academic education lover, and it was just, I needed to come here. And that was the ticket to be able to come here. And I went back then because I knew then Ashwin and I would be getting married and we knew we'd be living here. It's also in those days to get a job out of a comms program was very difficult.
Mm.
If you were a techie or finance, then those two things were easy. And I absolutely knew I wasn't going to do that.
Mm.
We got married, moved to New York. My first job was working at a copy center on 57th Street between 8th and 9th, and I would make copies of people's resumes. $7 an hour. I thought I hit the jackpot. It was amazing. But the notion of the resume was very important because all day long I was helping people type up their resumes and then making copies of their resumes. So, that sort of it subconsciously and consciously started giving me a sense of how I needed to talk about myself and built up my own courage. I was still pretty fresh off the boat kind of mentality. And then I just decided to pick up the phone and call the one alum from Annenberg. I went to see him. He worked at an ad agency. And he said, what do you want to do? I said, anything but advertising. Because I thought I would be selling out, like selling my soul or something. And he started laughing and he goes, there's this thing in advertising called planning. And I think you'd like it a lot. So I said, okay. So he said, what are you doing right now? And I said, making copies of resumes. So he said, so make copies of resumes for a bit. And why don't you come and just hang out here and do an unpaid internship? But at that point, you can imagine giving up $7 an hour for an unpaid internship. It didn't resonate. And Ash was working at BT at that point. And 30 years ago, it wasn't like if you worked at Bankers Trust, you were getting what these young kids, we could live, we could eat. But I was like, I'm going to do it because I needed to work. And then I fell in love. The reason communication happened, because it seemed I have the gift of being able to talk. I like people. And my cousin lived in LA. So I knew I'd never be allowed to go. Higher education from a Punjabi family for a girl, not a chance in hell. So I was like, I'm never going to be allowed to go anywhere. So then it was LA because, my cousin, who is my older sister, my greatest supporter, and even to this day, nobody I look up to more than her in my life. She now lives in Bombay, Kavita. So then I researched what was close to LA. And I owe a lot to her and her husband, because I think if they weren't there, there was no way I was getting to the US.
There have been a lot of mentors, supporters, cheerleaders, tormentors in your life. So talk to me about that journey. And from there, we'll segue to McCann.
Mentors is a very big word. I like the word you use is supporters. And in every different time in your life, there's a different supporter.
True.
Right? And I've been very, very lucky. I think the first people I would say who were the biggest supporters for me were definitely mom and dad, because when I said I want to go to the US, in my father's family, they were going through a lot of, like the typical Indian family of brothers, like everybody's fighting with everybody. So there was that going on. And here this girl goes, I want to go to the US. And my dad literally looked at my mom and said, how are we going to do this at this moment? Right? And my mom was like, we're going to figure this out. And then the GREs got cancelled. All of India, because of cheating. I don't know if you remember this they cancelled the GREs for one whole year in India. So then I woke up one day and I said, the only way I can get to the US is I need to go to Singapore to do my GREs. And my parents are looking at me and going, what? So my mother came with me to Singapore for me to do my GREs. And my mother's side of the family, the fact that a girl was going to go to America to study was like,
she's crazy.
What are you doing? Loose morals. My grandmother, I never forget, she tells me, I have to say something in Hindi now. She tells me, beta, जब ये दरवाजा खोलोगे ना, एक bat रख लेना. Like, that's the level of fear.
Yeah.
This is my grandmother telling me, keep a bat. Before you open the door in America, make sure you have a bat in the hand. That I'm going to this land of sort of unknown and what's going to happen to you. The fact that I wanted to marry Ashwin. Again, girl wants to have a love marriage. Then the biggest supporter of my life has been my husband. And I don't want to say accepted. I can never understand how to describe. He's just there. It's like, I know I will never fall and get hurt. He's never ever interfered with what I want to do, but he's just always there. Should I go to Ogilvy? Should I not? Oh my God, if I leave Ogilvy, if I go to Ogilvy after 26 years of McCann, he just must have listened to my nonsense for hours and hours, but he lets me make my own decision. Then, as an immigrant, when I come into an industry where everybody's talking about Oreos, I'm like, what is an Oreo? It's Exxon. I was in a meeting and everybody's talking about putting a tiger in a tank. And then I'm like, but there was no internet to go Google what is tiger in a tank. It's like one of the most famous taglines of all time in America. So it's just that feeling of being an outsider all the time, because advertising is a very cultural, the nuance of understanding American culture. And they're all the people who taught me, who gave me the ability to be able to ask these questions, right? So I had two bosses early on, Nat and Suresh. They were Indian guy. What a incredibly lucky thing. Biggest supporters of mine early on in my career. Now she's my kid's godmother. She was my first boss at Anderson & Lemke, Jill Howell, still part of my life, one of my biggest supporters. And then McCann, I had many. There was one consistent person who was the head of HR, Dana Mansfield. She would always give me that sort of pep in my step to say, if you're not going to do this, who is? There's so many moments where you just want to go like, man, this is too tough. That person gets to do it so much easier and I have to work twice as hard. And she was like my coach, give me that sort of pep talk. There was Luca Lindner, another person who just sort of supported me a lot. And so lots of people giving me a lot of sort of support and thing. But Harris, he gave me the seat. Till you don't get to sit in the chair, till you don't get to actually have that power seat, you are still just trying to make it. Once you get the seat, now I can start doing things. Till then, you're just fighting your game, right? To say, how can I have a seat? One of the biggest supporters I'll call out, she won't even know it, is this woman, Christine Lane, a very quiet girl who said to me, what do you want to do? And I didn't know how to answer the question. She said, do you want to be the CEO? And I was dumbfounded. Like, I went literally ashen white in my face. And I couldn't answer that question. And the joke is, if I'm speechless, something's really wrong. I just couldn't talk. Because in my own head, I knew I wanted to say yes, but I didn't know how to say yes. And then I stumbled. And then I finally just said, this is so hard. I don't know why it's so hard. And I don't know why I'd never thought of it. Yes, I want to be seen. That support, to be able to verbalize it, because once I could verbalize it, and I tell people so many times to say, you have to acknowledge to yourself what you want. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but say it.
That was one of the turning points, right?
Very, very big turning point for me. And then Harris Diamond, he was new. He called me into his office, had to say, what do you want to do? I was just so confused. I finally said to him, I didn't know him. He was there like maybe 3 weeks. I said, I don't know what you're asking me, like existential question, because I was a strategist. He said, no, what do you want to do in your career? So I said, there's something else I can do other than what I do? She said, I think you should run something. And I looked at him and I just had this smile on my face and I was like, yeah. So I said, what is that? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh. He's like, but we'll figure it out. And then didn't talk to me for 3 months. And then 3 months later, he figured out. He's like, okay, you're going to run the MasterCard account globally. And I'm like, okay, but I don't do one thing. I said, I'm not good at that. He said, well, you figure it out. And I was really nervous. I did that. 18 months later, he called me and he said, you're going to become the MD of New York. And I said, what is the MD of New York? There's no position. He said, yeah, we're going to create the position. You're going to be the MD of New York. And you're going to learn how to run an office. I did that. Then he made me the president of New York, of North America. And I would really fight with him all the time. And he would always say, one day you will have my job and you will be prepared. Now, I didn't do his job, but then I owe Mark Reed, another supporter, who has given me the biggest seat at the biggest table in my industry, right? There's one very critical person I left out, who I call my mentor, my tormentor, who taught me how to lead, who is the only person I'd say who's been my role model in what kind of leader I want to be. And that's Nina DeSassa, who is like my American mother, the kids' grandmother. Even to this day, I will ask myself questions, like if I'm in a position, how would Nina do it? And how Nina did it in her time is be fiercely competitive, and winning and performing was of paramount importance, but never forgetting two things: her humanity and her femininity.
I love that, yeah.
And I've added one thing to it. So watching her and having her as close as she is to me, I talk to her, by the way, every day of my life. It's like I have this competitive spirit. I always say this: I'll debate everything. Debate is very important. Discussion is fundamental to any business, to anything in life. I've taught my children that. We will discuss, debate everything, but two things are not up for debate, which is the pursuit of greatness, not up for debate, and doing it with goodness. And my own interpretation of the goodness for me, for how I will manifest that, is humanity, is femininity, but it's my Indianness. So the first thing I said, I just don't want to be a leader who's an asshole. Then it was like, oh, I want to do it like a woman. So therefore, it's like, don't cry in the office. Why are you not allowed to cry in the office? Because the office was designed by men.
Yep.
And boys don't cry. Men don't like showing their emotions. And then the last thing, I think, has been really this chapter of my life, in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, where making sure that my Indianness is front and center stage has become really important to me.
And it's very ironic that for those first 7 years, you said I wasn't able to belong, right? But then David mentioned to me that one of your colleagues asked you, why don't you talk about your Indianness? And that's the time you started really putting it out there.
Yeah, one of my colleagues actually said to me, you don't talk about being a brown person. It was actually race related. And she was absolutely right. But because we didn't grow up with the color references, so the way I interpreted her comment, and I was like, oh my God, I actually don't, because you're so trying to conform and fit in, that I reached a point where I'm like, I got this. Like, I don't. Now it's time, right? I only wear Indian designers at events. Whatever I wear will have an Indian touch or a flair. And that's because I want to bring my Indianness into the industry. I want it to be known that I'm an Indian woman.
I saw your beautiful Payal Khanbala in your award.
I know after every event, I send her a note. And now I've just 6 months ago, I discovered Pero.
Yes.
Yeah. So now I'm like, totally fangirling Pero stuff. And these have become really important signals and symbols. And this was Mark Reed's advice to me. He said, whatever you do, go to India, make India your first trip. It was the best advice ever.
Yes, I saw that interview with Piyush and you said, Indians have got it right, or the Indian office has got it right. They need to now scale it.
Yeah. Our India office is the jewel. And this is not just me. I mean, you ask anybody, the India office is the jewel in the crown. And Piyush Pandey is the soul of this company globally. He is one of the most beloved people who epitomizes everything that Ogilvy stands for.
Yeah.
Everything. Yeah.
And I want to sort of double click on this Indianness which you're talking about. So suppose you had to answer this question 5 years back or 10 years back, would your answer have been the same?
No. The minute you stop being a work in progress, we might as well just be dead. So no, I'm evolving my own leadership, and not just my leadership, my own self.
Yeah.
Right? As I've come to Ogilvy, there's a whole 15,000 new people who came into my life. I have to evolve myself to understand the culture that they have belonged to, the culture that they have built. I had to be an outsider again, right? When I came here. In McCann, I was an insider. I knew it inside out. Again, the way I talk about Indianness, Ogilvy-ness, or McCann-ness is the same thing. These are all cultures that come with their own soul, their codes, their symbols. So I had to come in here and be a student of it, be respectful of it, see what needed to move forward, see what the roots that should never be violated. So I've evolved. I've never been a global leader till I came here. It's learning how to give up control and have influence. You can't run a global company with control. I can run an office with a great deal of control, right? And the most important thing, I think, is when you finally get this seat, your journey changes.
Yeah.
My journey changed that moment from being mine now to say now my role changed to say now mine's to open other doors. So I have more women in our leadership team than I would say pretty much any other agency. We're the only agency where the chief creative officer, one of the most important roles in our industry, is a woman. The CEO is a woman. The CFO, a black woman. And it's not just 3 women. We're all from different backgrounds. Head of PR woman, a head of health woman, head of EMEA woman, a head of Australia woman, a head of London woman, a head of India is a woman.
So is this intentional?
This is extremely intentional.
Wow.
The fight that I had to fight for myself, now when I have the seat, not to open the doors for other people, that would be shameful in my mind. Absolutely and utterly shameful. And you know what? The thing is not just there's all these women. But you started, like I said, with a very generous introduction, but we're also a company that we're at the top of our game in terms of performance. I don't want to just have diversity at the table and say, oh my God, we're such a diverse company, but look at my business performance. I want the world to remember this period. To say it was one of the most diverse groups of people, and it was one of the most successful moments in the history of this organization, because there'll be many more chapters after us. This is an organization with roots that are so deep that this is going to go on for, generations. So it is absolutely intentional. And one thing I'm very clear with my leadership team is if somebody in my leadership team, because those are the ones I'm responsible for, and then I always say they will pay it forward if they feel it. If somebody in my leadership team fails, I look at it as a personal failure. Because my job is not command and control. That form of leadership, forget not current, I just don't think it's effective. Especially in a creative industry, because I just have 15,000 human imaginations. I need 15,000 human beings and their imaginations to fly. For that, they need to have psychological safety. For that, they need to have ambition. That's my job. I have a belief, by the way. 99% of people wake up in the morning and they say they want to do their best. I do not believe people wake up and, yes, there's always an exception to the rule. And I always say, if they want to be lazy, they want to do it really well that day. We don't actually wake up in the morning and, like most of us, and crave mediocrity. Even like I say, if you want to be a sloth, you're going to say, today I'm going to do nothing. I'm just going to go out. I'm going to get pissed drunk. And that's good. Go do it well.
So can we talk a little bit about this all-women leadership team?
There's not all women, by the way. You need diversity.
Yes.
The funny thing is, I talk about like all these women, but there are two people we joke who get a 6 o'clock call and a 7. They make a lot of fun of me. They tease me mercilessly, all of them. They're two guys. So the people who I talk to probably, who are like my right hand, my left hand, my front hand, and one of them you've spoken to, David Ford and Philip Hyman. He's my head of marketing and head of communications, the reputation of the company and the growth of the company. I talk to Stacy and Liz a lot as well, but like Philip and David Ford, there is not possibly a day in my life where they're either not my last call in the night or my first call in the morning. And by the way, they make a lot of fun of me, but if I don't call, watch them. If I don't call for 2 days, they're like, what happened? Dev hasn't called.
They have so much admiration for you. And I could sense that when I spoke to David yesterday. Right. Devika, you said that I had to fight a lot. So can we talk a little bit about what did those fights mean and how did you navigate them?
There was a point where just working and sort of having a successful career as a strategist was good enough. And then there was that turning point where I was like, no, I want to run something. I want to be a CEO. And then my ambition at that point, I think, became more evident. One thing I've also been really conscious of in my ambition is that if I'm succeeding, you're taking the people ahead with you. And there was a lot of like soul searching to say, okay, if I don't advocate for myself, nobody's going to do it. And I had this conversation with one of my bosses, and he said, one of the problems is you're too ambitious. One of the problems. And I think I was shell-shocked for a second. And I said, would you ever say that to a man? Because what do we say? It's amazing. Hey, this ambitious guy. He's such a go-getter. An ambitious woman's a bitch. And I said it to him because I'm very close to him. And I said, would you ever say this to a man? That one of the problems is he was too ambitious. And he kept quiet and he said, no, you're absolutely right. This was an incredible learning moment for me. And I said, okay, now let's talk about what you really meant. And we had a great conversation about it. And he was right. There's some things I needed to modulate. Right? So it was a great conversation. But why do women actually not want to be ambitious? Because they're told it's a problem. And we don't like to be problems. Because oddly, we've been wired to solve them, never be the problem. Right? He's a boy, he's going to break things.
It's okay, so what?
Girls don't do that, even as little girls. Girls don't do that. Oh, he's a boy, his room is really bad. You're a girl. Girls don't have messy rooms. There's such subtle things that we do from the time. The other thing I always say, but I have a boy and a girl. People always ask me about my daughter, and I'm always like, she's going to see me and figure it out. My obsession has been raising the boy. And now the biggest joke in our house is like, Anya, my daughter, always says, she's like, Mom, you have 2 girls. Like, he's the sweetest, softest. And still, he's a guy, but he's a sweet, soft guy. So that's one example of my fight. I had a boss that was horrible to me. Horrible, horrible, horrible. Horrible, horrible. And I had 3-4 years where I had to put up with the boss. And sometimes it didn't see the best of me because it went against everything in my being. And that was a real struggle. There were moments I didn't like the person I was, and I had to figure out how to not make myself into somebody, because I give this speech to everybody all the time in my life. You can't change your environment. The only thing you have in your control is yourself. Those were tough moments.
4 years is not a short time period. And given your ethos, your values, your philosophy, and everything else, then what kept you going?
What kept me going is I would stand up for myself. In the beginning, I didn't. And I couldn't live with myself. And then that person was not allowed to talk about anybody to anybody in the way that I didn't think was appropriate in front of me.
And you don't work for an organization, but you work for a leader.
You only work for people. There is nothing, any organization is made of people.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, I was saying this to somebody the other day, one of my dearest friends. There's about 5, 6 women who I've worked with for years, and if they called me right now and they will say, Dev, I need you. I need a dev talk. I will drop everything. And I said to her the other day, because she was saying, I want to be a president and I want to be this and I want to be that. And I said, I'm just going to reframe all of this for you. You have now had a couple experiences that you haven't loved. In your next thing that you're going to go do, pick your boss. Not your title, because that we can do, right?
Yes.
And it's again on hindsight, by the way. It's not like I was born knowing, you know, always pick your boss.
Again, in hindsight, would you give the same advice to your son and your daughter when they're early on starting a career?
No, and early on I'd say, go do whatever, do something. Mm-hmm. She's at a different phase in her career who I'm giving this advice to. Early on to my kids, I'm like, do anything. I think for the kids, it's really horrible today. You know, they see Mark Zuckerberg, who was billionaire by 29, and they think they're supposed to be, that's horrible. Like I keep reminding my own children to say, you're going to live till 110. Go falter a bit, experiment. You don't have to figure out your life at 24 and 25. I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't. Now, we all accidentally fell into things. But this whole thing right now where you have to have the answer is just horrible.
So, when you had this horrible boss, you did not want to quit?
I did. But then I had a boss's boss. Harris was my biggest protector at the end of the day. We can talk about it for hours. Companies are strange things, right? And I'm telling you at the same time, that was the period I was supported most by, right? You're not going to get to have the highest seats at the table and say, oh my God, it's going to be so easy. That's the other thing people have to remember. My job isn't easy. It is my job to make people feel it's easy. That I will tell you. Because the minute people feel like the boss is having a difficult time and they don't think it's easy, they all lose their confidence.
I actually want to segue into another topic which you talk about a lot, which is vulnerability. And I'm also a big fan of Brené Brown. Help me understand your definition of vulnerability. How do you then make the job look easy when it's not easy? And then how do you still bring that vulnerability in your being?
Okay, so I'll give you an example from last night and this morning. I was talking to Gloria, who's been my assistant for a very long time, who I couldn't live without. She keeps me insane, and she'd say I make her insane, probably. She was telling me about my calendar in October, my travel schedule. And I just snapped at her, and I was like, there's no way I can do that. I mean, it was just because it was an insane trap. And I said, I'm sorry, there's no way I can do that. I don't want to hear about it, like, somebody fix it. I knew I did that, and I knew it was wrong of me. One of the reasons I was 3 minutes late is because I apologized to her, and I said, I'm really sorry I snapped at you. And this is my vulnerability moment for her. One is apologizing. I was wrong. She didn't deserve to be snapped at over the phone. I could have spoken about it today. So acknowledging that I'm not right. And it's super important, by the way. You're not going to be right all the time. And I am going to snap sometimes. But the most important thing is what I had to tell her after that. I said, Gloria, I am human. I can't go to Australia, from Australia, take an overnight flight to Singapore, then do 2 days in Singapore, then fly back here. The second weekend, I'm traveling from Singapore back to New York. And then the following week, I have an intense week with people coming in from Latin America. I said, I just can't do it. Vulnerability, I came into the office the other day and I walked into the office and I said, oh God, I just don't feel like working. And it was a day I didn't have 7 client meetings and 8 crises to deal with. It was a very easy way for me to tell Gloria, can you cancel all my meetings? I'm going to call my daughter. I'm going to take her out. And I decided that would be absolutely the wrong thing to do. So I walked around the entire office telling everybody I really didn't feel like working, so I was coming to just hang out and waste their time. And they all thought it was hysterically funny. But it was my way of saying, I feel like this some days, so I understand even you feel like this some days.
Normalizing it for people.
Just normalizing it. I talk about menopause all the time. I'm going through some crazy-ass menopause nonsense. right? As leaders, every time you're vulnerable, you're actually normalizing. So, me walking around everywhere, and people laugh, by the way. They'll say, oh, Dev's coming. She's going to talk about menopause, because it's like my latest thing is, here's the symptoms I'm going through, so let me tell you. Because vulnerability is not your weakness. Vulnerability is your humanness. And I have very strong beliefs, and I will come in the next day and I'll say, you know what? That was wrong. I think we should do it this way. And people will laugh at me and they'll go like, yesterday you were... I said, yeah, but I thought about it more. And I was wrong yesterday.
That's beautiful.
And I just think one thing that in the workplace doesn't exist, which drives me crazy, is the two simple words like, I'm sorry. This is the one thing I have to do a lot of, which is everybody, I'm like, you're so busy explaining why you're right. Have you thought about for 2 seconds where you might be wrong? And the minute you do that and you go to the other person and you go, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't. And we're in a client industry, and I tell people all the time to say, were we right? We did it this way and it was right. And I said, okay, were we right? Could we have done it better? When there's a difficult moment with a client. And inevitably it's like, yes. I said, okay, pick up the phone and call up the client and say, I'm sorry. You know what? We could have done better. What is somebody going to say? They're going to say, you know what? Take 2 more days. Do it. We're so busy all the time in personal relationships, in life. One of my uncles used to always say, rectification, no justification.
I love that, yeah.
And I really practice it. I'm like, oh, stop with the justification. Like, how are we solving this thing? And that's my point about energy. I think it's the most important human resource. It is not actually time, it is human energy. Positive human energy is a force multiplier. And negative human energy is a real suck. So if I can harness 15,000 people and I can harness positive energy out of that, do the 15,000 people become as effective as 20? Now imagine how well the business will perform. So if you actually think about all these things, they're very simple. And you feel better. My son asked me the other day, when was the last time you were sad? And I was like, sounds really like a tough question. I said, when my dad died? When a big family incident happened? When my father-in-law died? He said, so you don't get sad on a day-to-day basis? And I looked at him and I said, sweetie, I have a great marriage, one of the toughest jobs in the world. I have 2 amazing kids. I have friends, some of whom I want to smack half the time. But that's life. Being sad is my choice. I choose not to be sad. Do I get irritated? Yeah, but irritation, you can snap out of it. So, I don't know, I think energy is in such short supply, given the political situation in the world, given all the macro issues. So one of the things I'm doing for my leadership team is I want to talk to them about their own energy.
Okay.
And if they're conserving it, if they're utilizing it right, are they putting the right energy into their lives? And then I started thinking about it and I said, okay, it's all very well to talk, but what is the action that I can do to show them that as a company and me as their leader, I care about them. Every leader gets a $5,000. It's going to be called something, I'm branding it right now, but like an energy fund or something. And there's 10 things they get to use it for.
Wow.
Because harnessing their energy is the most important thing. If they don't use it, it goes away. So I want a forcing mechanism for them to be able to regenerate their own energy so then they can become radiators for other people. Because the burden at the end of the day, everybody works really hard, don't get me, but there is a burden of leadership.
Yeah. What are you doing for yourself to manage this challenge?
I've lost 35 pounds and I've started taking control of my body. I had given up control of my body, my health, my well-being to my work and my family. And I have reclaimed that in the last 18 months. So my priority is I exercise, not because of any other thing, because it is a way of me taking care of myself, which becomes my own energy generator. I do a lot of things for myself that are wellness-oriented. My husband says they're all psychosomatic. I'm like, it works. I don't care if it's psychosomatic or science-based. It works. So reclaiming my body and having control over it has been my own source of regeneration for myself. And I'm also really vocal about it because I want other people to be able to say to me, I can't do this because I have to go have a massage. I don't know, whatever it is. I'm good with that. I'm good with you telling me that you can't do something because you need to take care of yourself in that moment. And by the way, nor is performance an option. We still have to be a high-performing organization. But I'm good with people being able to say to me, Dev, I can't do it right now. I need a timeout. Mm-hmm. Philip said to me, I'm going away, don't call me. I got it. I want people to be able to do that.
Love that. So we wanted to talk about the speech which Michelle Obama gave yesterday.
Okay, so the speech was about how hope is so fundamental for the human condition, which I'm a big believer in. If you think the world is a shit place, it's going to be a shit place because you've decided. So you have to hope for something. And then she pivots in her speech and she says, when you marry hope with action, then you do something.
Things happen. Mm.
Right? If somebody is putting you down, you do something. If you want to change the course of your day, you do something. If you want to win a new client, you do something. And just that simplicity of hope being so fundamental, but when you marry hope and action, what is the simple mantra of life? Do something.
Yeah.
By the way, it wasn't about the election to me. It was such a simple message of life. To hope is to be human.
Beautiful. So, I don't know if you saw it, the series of interviews Melinda Gates did leading up to her 60th birthday. And in the end, she shared her wish list, which included that I would love for women and people of color to find their due place in the world. So, my last question to you is, how does that resonate with you, given that you're a woman and a person of color?
I mean, there are days I pinch myself. I mean, I feel like I've worked a lot. I have achieved. I've stopped saying, I have been lucky enough. No, I haven't been lucky. Timing is everything. But, I work my ass off to get, so I feel like I've achieved the place that I wanted. But I'm not done. And I don't know what that is. But I say it again and again. I'm 55 years old. I have another chapter. I don't know what that chapter is. Once you've run Ogilvy and had a successful period, I always say, ride the successful period and then ride out. So while I've been lucky enough, I guess, as a woman of color to be able to have a seat, to be able to pay it back, I hope, in ways. The soul searching I'm doing right now, what is that other chapter? When I left McCann, it was like, oh my God, I can't have my entire COVID happen. And I was like, I died, they'll say she worked at McCann. So it was like, my story needs to be more interesting. Ogilvy is unquestionably the best, most storied agency in this industry. To be able to do this has been the biggest joy and achievement of my life. But now I go, oh my God, you worked in advertising. How boring would that be? So I'm like, okay, how do I make the next chapter more interesting? I have no idea what that is, and I have no idea if I'll do it. I don't know. But that's what my soul searching is about right now.
Thank you, Devika. There are so many questions I have in my mind, but I know it's impossible. So I'm hoping that I will bring you back again.
I would love to do that. Thank you so much. It's been a delight. Say hi to Viren, and if you're in New York, we should all have dinner.
Definitely. If you come to Houston, we definitely should meet up.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do hang on for just one more minute. I have a request for you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Atlanta Diaries on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you follow. Do join us in our mission to empower and inspire by sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It will be great if you can share on the social media platforms you follow, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any other. Please leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Lastly, I wanted to share with you that many of my coaching clients and listeners have created a cheat sheet with their key takeaways from the episodes. I invite you to consider jotting down one or two key takeaways as you navigate your amazing journey. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.